Good morning. For today, we'll be talking about Individualized Education Program. But before we do that, let's go back and let's have a review of our previous topic, which is motor development. So for our topic on motor development, I used Osmond and Gallagher, who are the main authors of some of the references, of the major references on this topic. It is essential for teachers to understand the process of development, not only to be able to teach well among our students with intellectual disabilities, but the general population of students. We need to know how the typical process of development goes so that we will be able to give the appropriate activities in a certain stage of development. For adapted PE, we use this theory, or we use our knowledge about motor development so we will be able to identify the unique needs of our students. As I have mentioned to you, the different phases of motor development is one of the ways by which we can understand or develop the appropriate activities for our students. So the typical sequence of how movements are acquired is very important for us to know so we can give the appropriate activity or task. So motor development is simply learning to move with control and efficiency and characterized by 4 predictable phases. So we all know that there are 4 movement phases, and we start with reflexive to rudimentary, and then we acquire the fundamental movement phase, and then we are ready to apply the skills in sports-related movement phase. Gallagher's hourglass model of motor development better facilitates the discussion on motor development because it gives us the appropriate or approximate age periods by which each phase is expected to happen. So I advise you to study this one, and you will note that by age 7 to 11, students are already expected to participate in specialized or sports-related movement activities. And 14 years old and up, they are already expected to develop attitude, not only skills, but also attitude of being able to participate in lifelong physical activities. Okay, so another topic that we need to go back to is perceptual motor development. Perceptual motor abilities, we need to understand how we acquire skills through perceptual motor development, because some deficits can occur, and these deficits will lead learners to have difficulty in acquiring certain skills. So some deficits related to perceptual motor ability are often named as characteristics of people with learning abilities. So for example, they have poor spatial orientation, they have difficulty with body awareness, they have clumsiness or awkwardness, they have poor balance. These are the results or the perceptual motor deficits that we need to understand. Why do they have perceptual motor deficits? And how can we address the deficits? So, ibig sabihin ng deficits, mga kakulangan sa kanilang the way they process the information and the way they acquire the sensory information. Let me emphasize that the ability to learn and to function effectively is affected by our perceptual motor development because this process permits an individual to receive, to transmit, organize, integrate, and attach meaning to sensory information and at the same time formulate the appropriate response. So, for example, we gain certain information from the environment, then we are expected to respond, and the individual is also expected to move and learn, no, in a variety of environments. So, if the perceptual motor development has certain deficits or problems, then the motor output can also have deficiencies. I was able to discuss this concept to you in our previous lesson, but just to go back and review, there are 4 steps in this schema about a perceptual motor process. So you know that we start with the inputs we get from our senses involving visual, auditory, kinesthetic, vestibular, and tactile. Now, the input that we get from the environment is processed using our central nervous system processing. And let us also emphasize that past sensory information is also used to be able to come up with a decision, no? The resultant decision that is not only coming from the short-term memory, but also part of the long-term memory, which is transmitted through the motor mechanisms, translated as motor behavioral output, which are our movements, no? Or our overt movement or observable behavior that is actually the actual movement response, no? Such as running, jumping, throwing, and all the other motor behavioral outputs. During feedback, the adequacy or the nature of the movement response is evaluated and judged. If it is judged as inadequate, then we make certain adjustments. If it is successful, then you don't need to make any adjustments with our movement. The feedback that we get from the environment or from our proprioception can also be used as an input to be able to and integrate also in our future actions or movements. Batting a pitch softball is a very good example to illustrate the concept about perceptual motor process. So as you can see, as the pitched ball comes towards the plate, the batter focuses on the ball and tracks it. So we have information about the speed, direction, spin, and other flight characteristics that is picked up by our stimulus reception or by our senses. For example, our visual system, okay, and we use that for processing. So the information is transmitted via the sensory neurons to the central nervous system, where it undergoes sensory integration. So because of the characteristics of the environment, the nature of the sensory information, the past experience, and the incoming object is perceived as a softball to be hit. Okay, but also the batter's past experience will influence the ability to fixate and track the softball and be able to process the information on how to hit it. How to hit it becomes a process of comparing with previous experiences. No, for example, the arc of the ball is compared with that of previous experience, no, when the act was performed. And so that is the form of feedback that we use, no, to respond to the present situation. So information and examples of the sensory systems in the perceptual motor process is what we use to be able to respond to or to give the appropriate swing, no, or the decision based on the previous steps of the process. So this decision becomes part of the long-term memory to be used for future reference. And so each of the process in the each of the step in the perceptual motor process is important for the batter to be able to respond appropriately. Now, if there is a certain deficit or a breakdown, no, at the input or during the integration or during the output, so there might be um, a deficit, no, in the appropriate response that the batter will be able to do. So for example, people with sensory impairments such as blindness or deafness might not be able to adequately take in the visual or auditory information from the environment. And the result is that the information will not be able to reach the central nervous system. Students with learning disabilities or autism spectrum disorder might not be able to attend to or might not receive the relevant information. And so sensory integration is affected by a lot of different factors, and we have to understand the difficulty that each student encounters and be able to address that, because motor output is affected by inappropriate functioning during previous steps, as well as the conditions that may affect or influence the movement, including weakened or distorted or absent transmission of information. So in short, we have to analyze the factors that can cause perceptual motor deficits. In this next slide, I'm going to show you certain disabilities and how are we going to address their needs. So for example, a student with visual disability, for us to be able to address the need, you need to focus on the development of residual visual perceptual abilities and to help the child compensate for visual, perceptual, or motor deficits, no, by enhancing other sensory information. So give particular attention to input and feedback steps in the perceptual motor development process. In short, we give more cues, verbal cues, or giving off immediate feedback such as sounds or beeping, a beeping sound when, for example, a goal is scored. For students with auditory problems, we need to focus on, or we need to compensate by enhancing development associated with sensory systems that are intact. So give particular attention to input and how are they going to process the skill, and to the feedback steps. So for example, we have to provide visual directions or pictures at each station. Haptic abilities refer to the sense of touch, in particular relating to the ability to manipulate objects using the sense of touch and proprioception. So students with haptic disabilities are children who are clumsy, who have orthopedic or neuromuscular and neurological impairments. So for them, we need to focus on the development of vestibular. So when we say vestibular, this is the organ in our inner ear that is responsible for the sense of balance or spatial orientation. Kinesthetic is, of course, movement. And tactile perception is basically tactile or relating to touch. And we have to integrate the activities with visual and auditory activities. So there might be a need to focus on the input in the motor response and feedback steps. So for example, we use physical guidance. We use a lot of prompting techniques as part of our instruction. For students with cognitive or affective disability, such as intellectual disabilities, emotional disturbance, we need to focus on needs that is determined by assessment of perceptual motor abilities. Ibig sabihin, saan ba sila nahihirapan gaining sensory information? Nahihirapan ba sila mag-process? Cognitively? Or nahihirapan ba silang mag-acquire ng feedback from the environment and from the self? So, or nahihirapan sila dun sa pag-create or pag-produce ng motor output. So, saang aspeto sila nahihirapan? Yun ngayon ang ating gagawa ng adjustment. So, for example, we need to provide, if the problem is on feedback, so we need to provide more positive, specific feedback that will allow the student to perform the skill correctly. Sometimes the problem is with the way the sensory input, or there are problems in the processing of information. That's why certain perceptual motor deficits occur. So for us to be able to respond to this, we need to understand what sensory motor stimulation is. So in the next two slides, I'm going to share with you some of the activities that we can do to be able to develop sensory motor aspect. Although some of the programs designed to nurture sensory motor system can be conducted by professionals and those who specializes in early childhood development, or movement therapist or occupational therapist. So our goal is to be able to stimulate our sensory motor systems so that we will be able to promote the adequate perceptual motor and motor development. So I'd like you to study this, and this is just an additional information if you'd like to improve more, for example, on the different components of sensory motor development. What can be done? For example, tactile integration. How do we develop their sense of touch? So these are some of the activities. How do we integrate kinesthetic integration or body awareness? In the next slide, you can see here activities that you can use to improve vestibular integration, or vestibular is balance. How can we improve visual activities that we can use to improve their visual ability as well as their hearing abilities? So I hope that this additional information about the two previous topics that we had can help you better address some of the problems that you will encounter among your adapted PE students. So next, let's move on with designing the individual education program. So students with disabilities are mandated to receive individualized education programs to meet their unique needs. As I have mentioned to you before, SPED teachers are required to be able to create an IEP for each of their students. But in our case, we will not attempt to be able to formulate one because hindi tayo qualified with just one subject. Sabi ko nga, magagalit sa atin yung mga taga-SPED kasi ang taga nilang pinag-aralan yan. And tayo, isang subject lang, will be able to create an IEP. So what I intend for us to do is to give you an overview of an IEP. And although hindi lang naman IEP ang mga kailangan ang pwede nating gawin para sa ating estudyante. Why is it that it's not only IEP? Because according to the the law, no, the IDEA law, which is also governing our laws here in the Philippines in terms of SPED, depending on the circumstances or any of the different individualized plans might be required or recommended. So, ibig sabihin, it's not only IEP, but we can also have the accommodations plan. We can also have IPEP or the individualized PE program. For children from 0 to 2 years of age, then it's an individualized family service plan that is most appropriate for them to use. So, in our case, doon tayo pasok sa number 2 and number 3, which we'll also discuss. Okay, so we have 3 documents that we can use. The first one is the IEP. So this is the document that is used for children with disability. So the law governing that is IDEA. So again, we're using the law, the US state law, no? O pareho lang din naman yung kumbaga similar, almost similar kasi sabi nga ni Sir Roy sa atin, doon nakapattern yung batas natin dito sa Pilipinas. So, under IDEA, those who are qualified to receive an individualized education program are students with intellectual disabilities, hearing impairment, visual impairment, they have emotional disturbance, they have orthopedic impairments, they have learning disability, they belong to the autism spectrum disorder, they have TBI, they have speech or language impairment, or other health impairments that might not enable them to join the general physical education. So for age 0 to 2, it's the IFSP or the Individual Family Service Plan. But for ages 3 to 21, then it will be the IEP. Now, for students with unique needs, okay, they are qualified individual with a disability. So, ano yung mga conditions under that? They have HIV, they have asthma, alcohol or drug abuse, they have diabetes, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and other selected physical impairments. Then they are qualified under Section 504 or the accommodations plan. So later I'm going to show you an example of that. And for students without a disability, dalawa yung choice nila, no? They might be included in the general physical education if the condition is only for a short period of time. Kung sinabi natin short term, it's below 30 days. But if the condition will not enable them to participate in physical activity, then an IPEP can be recommended, which is the individualized PE program. So the students who will qualify for this are non-disabled students but have certain conditions such as they have been recuperating from injury, a disease, or they have certain conditions such as obesity, low fitness, or poor motor skills. But in the Philippines, we do not encourage that they will be separated from the regular PE program just because they have low fitness or they have poor motor skills. We still encourage them to join the regular PE program. Right? So, isa rin yan sa pamamaraan natin para ma-motivate din sila na mag-join into our class activities dahil kaya rin naman nila. So, later on, we will be talking more about the 504 and the IPEP. So, in the meantime, let's talk about individualized education program. So, an individualized education program is a comprehensive written document that will describe the process of providing the services and the detailed content of what those services will include. So, as I've mentioned earlier, this is particularly useful for those on and the SPED, occupational, OT also, or occupational therapy. So, ito yung mas gamit na gamit nila kasi ito detalyado, no, na proseso at content, no, kung ano ba yung mga activities and as well as goals of the student. So what does an IEP includes? An IEP will describe the student's present level of academic achievement as well as functional performance. So importante that there are measurable goals. There are the different types of activities or services, the frequency and duration of the services that is expected to be accomplished so that you can meet the stated goals. So here are the components of the IEP. We start with the statement of the present level of academic achievement and functional performance of the student. And then you have the statement of measurable academic and functional annual goals. And then the procedure on how you're going to measure and report the child's progress to the parents, as well as the different services and supplementary aids that you will be doing for the students, the statement of participation in general education settings, because of course it is our end goal to be able to include them in the mainstream. And then also what assessment accommodations can be done, as well as the schedule and the transition of services. So for this part, I'd like you to study the document that I gave you earlier before we had our lockdown. So for each part of the component of the IEP, I'd like you to study very well the sample, no? Yung ano ba yung itsura ng IEP, ano ba yung mga content ng bawat isa. No? So, pag-aralan nyo mabuti yung sample document that I gave you. And then, later on, I'm going to ask you to describe each part of the IEP. Next, let's talk about the accommodations plan. So, there is a certain section in the IDEA law, no? That is section 504. So, the accommodations plan is intended for some students with disabilities, but they will not require an IEP. But still, they will need appropriate accommodations and services. So, bakit? Kasi yung mga services na kailangan nila needs to be determined individually and documented individually. So, there are no mandated formats for this one. So, schools or teachers can develop your own format. So, I'm going to give you an example. So, this is an example of an accommodations plan. I think kaya nating gawin ito. First, we need to ask the nature of the problem or the student's need. Ano ba yung kondisyon ng bata? What evaluations have been conducted to determine that special needs? As well as the basis for determining that the child has a disability if you have any other basis. And then describe the nature of the child's disability. So, ano yung nature? Is it a health condition? Is it a physical condition? Emotional? Ano ba yung ano yung nature, no, nung kanyang disability? So, is there a major life activity that can be affected by the disability? And what can be done to accommodate or to modify the activities, the programs na we need to be able to do so as we can ensure that the child will have equal access to all district programs. So, ito is an example. Although there are some schools who also develop their own, so kailangan ipa-approve muna ito sa inyong admin. Hindi naman pwedeng basta na lang natin ito gagamitin. Pero for our personal use, we can use this to interview our students. Pero yung document mismo is not only the initiative of the teacher, it should be approved by the school heads bago natin siya ma-implement or magamit. Yun nga, we can use this only as our personal reference when we are interviewing or finding out the conditions of the student. Now, most common sa atin sa PE ay yung mga estudyante na wala namang disability but they have certain unique needs. Okay? So, gagawan ba natin sila ng IEP? Yun, that's the question. So, an IEP is more detailed and more elaborate and mas maraming detalye at information na kailangan gawin. Pero basically, yung structure ng IEP can also be used when we are developing the IPEP. The IPEP or the Individualized Physical Education Program is the one that we can provide for our students who do not have disability under certain laws or educational mandates. So how do we determine who needs an IPEP? So if there is a unique need, okay, that is apparent, ibig sabihin, kita agad natin na kailangan niya dahil they cannot participate or the students will not be able to participate safely or successfully in the general PE program. So kapag nakita natin na for example, yun nga, nakakast yung paa, no? So, hindi na natin yun kailangan pang idaan sa pang iba pang proseso. Interview can do, medical certificate can do, and then, ultima, bigyan na natin siya ng IPEP. Although there is a recommended procedure for evaluating the need for AP services of students without disability, medyo komplikado siya kung titingnan, pero basically it's about developing or gaining information from several sources such as parents, physician, other school teachers, yung kanyang advisor, no? Or the general PE teacher, ibig sabihin yung PE teacher talaga na nag-handle sa klase nila, and of course the student. So the process starts with the referral or medical certificate, and then you have to notify the parents or sometimes yung parents na mismo yung nagno-notify. And then, you evaluate. So, sa evaluation, you have to consult the family or the school physician kung ano ba yung mga activities na hindi niya pwedeng gawin at talaga bang kailangan siyang i-excuse. The general PE teacher, so upon the recommendation of the general PE teacher, nakita ng based observation ni PE teacher, the student mismo, and the appropriate test na maaaring ipinagawa sa kanya. Pwedeng based from that, makapag-create tayo ng assessment and creation of the individualized PE program. So, as I've mentioned earlier, yung IPEP naman ay siguro a more simplified version of the IEP. So, pwede nating gawin as a format yung IEP, pero siguro hindi ganoon kadetalyado. Now, after the assessment of the committee, CAPE is a committee handling the Adapted Physical Education Program. Now, we will notify the parents that the student will be transferred or will be given an IPEP. And then, yun na, ibibigay na natin, i-design na natin, at ibibigay na natin sa bata yung program na create. Of course, the whole system does not end there. You have to continually monitor and review. If there is a need to discontinue, kasi siguro na naging eligible na siya for the general physical education program. So we are going to stop with the IPEP, and then balik na siya doon sa kanyang general PE program. So I'd like you to take note that it is not only the IEP that serves as a document in adapted PE. So we have the IFSP, or in the Individualized Family Service Program for children from age 0 to 2. For those with disability, yun na nga, yung ating IEP. But we can also have the accommodations plan, and you can also have the IPEP. So I'd like you to take note that the process does not only involve formulating the main plan, but also involve measurement and assessment. Kaya inuna natin yung topic na yun. So we need to first assess if the students will qualify for that. And if the students will qualify, then we should be ready to develop the measurable goals for each of our students. And in developing, we also need to consult with other stakeholders such as parents, teachers, other teachers, and of course the student. Ano ba yung main goal niya na pwede niyang iset, instead of participating in the general PE program or sa klase, sa general na klase natin, baka bigyan siya ng alternative activity. Now, in giving the alternative activity, magsaset pa rin tayo ng goal na related doon sa ating subject area. And then, I'd like to also take note na in the designing and implementing the program, we should also monitor kung na-achieve ba yung goal na sinet. And then, eventually, our task is to make sure that the student returns to the mainstream or sa ating general PE class. Okay? So, thank you very much. I hope that you learned something today. And I hope that everyone is safe. Sana matapos na ang ating ECQ para tayo ay magkita-kita na ulit at bumalik na ulit sa ating klase. Thank you very much and have a nice day.